Yeah.
Thanks very much. Can you all, is my mic on? Yeah. Thanks very much for organizing this, and thanks for having me here. Yes, you're right. It is a very important subject. And I think even as we go into this really terribly difficult second phase of the pandemic, all of us here, I guess everybody here probably has some engagement with children and young people. And I'm sure you're all struggling, just as we have, with what's going on with them. So I'll back up. I think the way we had talked about doing this is maybe I just talk about why we did this a little bit, and some thoughts on the methodology of how we did it. And then I think I'd like to share some of the findings, not all of them, because as you already heard the exciting news, you'll be sent a link to the whole report so you can read it at leisure. But I think just thinking about sharing findings from the point of view of thinking, well, what can we do? Particularly now, I think it's very urgent for us all to think now, what can we do in our individual capacities, in our capacities as, civil society, in our capacities as family members, because, many of us are engaged with children, even just, purely at a personal level, and are probably at our wit's end. So I think what I thought I would do is I would share some of the findings with a view to then just thinking about, well, if we understand this, if this is what young people are saying is their experience of loneliness and isolation, then let's think about what we as supportive adults, can and must do quite urgently to change the situation for young people. Yeah. So that's kind of how I thought about it. I'm old school. I have like my notes here. So I'll be doing the whole put on my glasses and look at my notes thing in a second. But just to back up to last year, in March when the lockdown started, Aangan, like many other NGOs, we immediately, like the immediate response was obviously, the response to hunger, because people were hungry. And so we were out there, we were, doing food relief a lot like almost everybody else. And then very quickly, the stories about violence started coming, we started hearing about spikes in family violence. Subsequently, we've all seen the data. Childline reported in like the course of 11 days or something, they had almost a lakh of calls coming in from children in distress. So the situation was one of, extreme distress. And I think that distress came from people not knowing, not understanding what was happening. So, we were also struggling to stay in touch with young people. Between May and July of last year, we tried to run like a support line, so that young people could call in and tell us how they were feeling and what was going on. And, there was just this preponderance of young voices. Like we had about 400 calls, nothing compared to, what Childline got, but I'm just saying like, just an NGO like doing this informally, 400 calls of kids talking about the distress they were experiencing and the loneliness. And I remember this one particularly poignant young person really, 14-year-old from Patna, who said to the Aangan social worker on the other end of the phone, you're the first person I've actually spoken to in months, in weeks, even though I live among people, no one talks to me. So that really hit us hard, and we were also, so we were having these conversations with young people. We were understanding their very palpable distress. As a child protection organization, we understand that when children are distressed, we understand that when young people are feeling isolated, when they're feeling lonely, when they're feeling all of these, feelings that young people always have, but now exacerbated by lockdown, by worry, by, financial hardship, by, their family, like being driven to the brink of desperation. We know, because we also work in shelter homes, we know that, that causes children sometimes, young people sometimes, to do rash things, to run away, to self-harm. We see those kids end up in rescue homes. We see that families sometimes resort to in order to adapt to difficult situations, they resort to things like, marrying their children off or sending their children out to work. So we understand that that there's the ramifications of this lonely, isolated child can actually snowball into something very, very serious. So we said, okay, what can we do about it? We were also, Suparna, who's the founder at Aangan, was having informal conversations with, other teenagers who she knows. And she was sharing that, it just seems like across financial backgrounds, children everywhere, regardless of class, are experiencing these things. So we thought, okay, if we're gonna do something about it, first let's actually understand what it is that young people are actually saying. What is it that they're experiencing? And let's hear it in their own voice. So it became important for us to do this because we'd been talking to young people, and those young people were like, we want to do something. We want to know more. It kind of became quite obvious to us very quickly that this was not something that we would go out as adult social workers and ask people, ke kaise lag raha hai, how are you feeling, and all of that. But this had to be something more intimate. It had to be something that young people were asking each other, that they were confiding into each other. So that was really how we said how we knew that this had to be like a participatory kind of model of methodology for doing the research. So we contacted young women, young girls, young women between the ages of 18 and 20, 17 and 20, 18 and 20. Many of them had been, involved with Aangan in the past. They were either alumni of our programs, they were peer leaders, they were friends and family of people who'd worked at Aangan. So we got together this group of 18 young women, and we posed the question to them about loneliness. And it was something that resonated with everybody. And they said, yes, we have to do this. And so then, as you already heard, it was a process really of supporting young people to say, well, how are you going to hear from your friends and colleagues and peers and people younger than you about what this experience is? So we did it in lockdown situation through, Zoom, WhatsApp. What was interesting about it really is that we had people from different backgrounds, from different financial backgrounds, living in different cities, speaking different languages, with very, very different experiences, with very, very different access to digital technology and relationships to digital technology. And it was actually like an eye-opener. My colleague Chaitali actually sort of worked very closely on designing this and working with other young people in the organization to bring this group of 18 together, and really to mentor them through the process of what should the questions be, why are we doing this, and what should the questions be. So we co-created the questions with our young researchers. And that was interesting, that was an interesting exercise because there were a couple of things. And I'll just say why it was interesting and why it was so important to have young people be very much a part of this is, we had some ideas, like we had this idea that, oh, we have to start asking, we have to ask questions about self-harm and, it's obviously like an issue and, do people have like suicidal ideation and all of this. And the young people came back to us very clearly and said, like, look, this is not the question that we feel comfortable asking right now. It's an important issue, but this is not something that we think we should be asking because we're not even going to be able to give the kind of support that's needed. So we think we should stay away from this. So, that was valuable insight. I remember there was another young person who said that, we should be talking about LGBT issues because that's a very serious issue and is a real cause for loneliness and isolation. And still others said, yeah, but we're going to be talking to our friends and colleagues because this we're going to be talking to people we know, we're going to be talking to, and they're not going to feel comfortable answering these questions truthfully. So it was conversations like this that we had, to come up with a list of questions. Aangan sort of helped by putting together an exhaustive list of like different kinds of questions. And then through group discussions, through Zoom meetings, these guys thrashed it out and decided how they would do it. And that's how we came up with the questions. And I think it gave us the confidence that the questions would be the correct questions. They would be asked sensitively. They would be asked, the people who would be doing the asking and who would be answering, there would be a relationship of some kind of trust and respect between them. And those were very important things. So yeah, participatory research with young people is really actually quite excellent. We don't just do it because it's, a nice thing to check off that, oh yeah, I did participatory research. It's such a buzzword. But also because, it's adolescents, yeah. Now, I mean, all of us work with adolescents. Adolescents have minds and opinions, and sometimes we try to straitjacket them into sort of adult thinking, and especially these were adolescent girls. And if you're going to do research on adolescent girls and their isolation, and you have to let them speak in their own voice. You have to be really ready and open yourself. And it takes something. Be really ready and open yourself to say, no, I'm just here to listen and I'm going to take guidance from you. So anyway, that was the process. And so 18 girls spoke to 255 respondents across the cities of Kolkata, Lucknow, Mumbai, Varanasi, Patna, across 5 cities. And this, they looked at a wide range because our girls came from different financial backgrounds, different kinds of schooling systems, different geographies. So we had a wide range of people that we spoke to. And now I'll sort of swiftly progress into highlighting what some of the key findings were. And remember again, I'm not going to talk about every single thing we found, but just keeping in mind what I think is important and valuable for us as people who work and care about young people, so that we can keep in mind, acha, if this is how they're feeling, then let's talk about solutions. Because I think at the end, it would be great if we could have some kind of like maybe open forum where we can like do some co-creating ourselves about like what possible solutions are for young people, particularly at this time. Yeah. So not surprisingly, the key finding, sort of basic finding, is that 84% of the respondents said that they experienced recurring kind of loneliness. So that's quite high. 84% of adolescents, of people between the age of 13 and 21, are saying that they feel lonely, and they don't just feel it in isolation once or twice, but they have recurring episodes of loneliness. Tragically, 8% of respondents, like 8% is quite high, said that they always feel lonely. In terms of this, we started this conversation like soon, like into lockdown. So a lot of the responses that first were coming were about like, I miss social interaction, I miss my friends, I miss going out, I miss talking to people. But then people were also talking about what it meant to be locked up at home. People were talking about the distress they were feeling with increased family violence, with increased conflict within the household. And this also was across backgrounds. Just conflict at home, arguments at home, and the impact that was happening, that was having on them, and the impact that was having on their feeling of disconnection. It was exacerbating their sense of isolation and their sense of being alone, because the atmosphere at home was also suddenly in this heightened state of stress, which, obviously that's unsurprising, but important to remember that young people, were picking up on it and were identifying it as a cause of increasing distress. We found that in the older age group of children, like say 15 to 18, about 70% of them were actually able to identify specific circumstances or triggers that made them feel lonely, that made them feel sad. Whereas in the younger group, 13 to 15, that wasn't the case. And I'm highlighting this only because I think it gives us an opportunity to, it gives us a sort of guidance to understand that maybe with younger kids, maybe with 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, we need to make more of an effort to actually have these conversations, to help them feel comfortable with with the idea even of being, of loneliness, of isolation, so that they can talk about it, help them to identify what it is that makes them feel isolated, so that we can actually do something to mitigate for it. But I highlighted that because I don't know what age groups people here work with, so it would just give a sense of like where you can sort of pitch your conversations with young people as you go forward. We also found that, in different, for different people, there were different times of day that felt lonely. So about 25% of the respondents felt more lonely at night when everyone else had gone to sleep, when they were alone, when they were, that's when they felt the most lonely. But interestingly, 33% talked about feeling lonely during the day. They talked about feeling lonely during school hours, because that's when they really felt very deeply the loss of connection. They talked about how even though they were surrounded, because everyone's in lockdown, so it's not like they were alone at home. Even though they were surrounded by family and friends, it didn't help. It actually exacerbated their loneliness, because it made them feel more closely what it is that they were missing out on. Also important to note that for 71% of the respondents, loneliness wasn't, and feeling isolation and the sense of solitude and loneliness wasn't about just wasn't about the physical act of being alone, right? But it was about the lack of connection. So it was social and emotional factors that made them feel alone. So it's not that I'm a only child living in a remote area and that's why I'm feeling lonely. It was, I have no sense of connection to anybody around me, even though I'm surrounded by family and siblings. I have no connection to them. So that's quite important to think about young people who feel lonely even when they're in the middle of groups, even when it's family, close, family and siblings. This one I found very troubling. It wasn't a big surprise, but still troubling. 51% of young people said that their sense of loneliness, their sense of isolation was heightened because they experienced like some form of social exclusion or bullying or some kind of marginalization. And to think that 51%, half of our young people should have that experience is actually quite heartbreaking. And when they broke it down, I found that even more interesting. So they named, like, there were three kind of big factors that came up. 27% said that, if you're perceived to be different or you have different kinds of abilities. And I think there was a sort of reference to having some kind of a disability, whether it was a learning disability or, just being different. That was 27%. I personally was not so surprised by that. I mean, I thought it would be much higher. 30%, yeah, and this is all urban. These are all urban studies. 30% said that it happened because they felt caste discrimination. And they talked about skin color, and they talked about caste, and they talked about how this plays out among peers. You go to a friend's house, you're not given water, or you're given water in a different vessel. And to think that in our cities, again, I mean, shouldn't be surprised, but it is hard hitting. It's hard hitting to see how it plays out in the lives of young people who are with their peers, with their equals. We're not talking about in some other power hierarchy, right? It's like with their peers, even with your peers as a young person, you are made to feel you're bullied, and you're made to feel marginalized and small based on your caste and the color of your skin. And then there was this interesting statistic. 47, more than 47, almost 48% of respondents said that they felt bullied. If you're an introvert and you're shy and you're not good at, at speaking, that increases your chances of being bullied. And maybe that seems obvious, but I don't know. That was really shocking. Imagine you're shy, you already have a problem with social engagement, you're already an introvert, and then you get bullied further for it, and you get marginalized further for it, and you get, excluded even more. So just the kind of vicious cycle of that for a young person, and how do you get out of it, right? I actually didn't think that being an introvert was quite such a cause for young people to attack each other, but there you have it. Then the other interesting things that we found was 56%, again, more than half, 56% of kids, of young people, said that they would be very unlikely to express or share any of their feelings of loneliness and isolation. 15% of this lot said that they would just try to distract themselves, and they would, and they would just try to distract themselves and forget about it. But 40%, yeah, of the 56 who are unlikely to share, 40% of them said it's too embarrassing to admit that you're lonely. Like, that's quite sad, right? It's too embarrassing to admit to anybody that you're lonely because it makes you seem even more like a loser. So you can't actually talk about it because it just diminishes you more, and people will feel sorry for you. And that, I guess, was difficult for young people. So 56% unlikely to reach out for support. So it tells us that we have our work cut out for us, because we're going to have to make them reach out for support if we are to change, if we're to change how young people feel. Then this is just, so logistically, we sort of know that there's kind of a, 57% of kids said they like face-to-face interaction more, but 41 said that they actually like the anonymity that being online and social media can give them. It gives them an opportunity. And I think other experts have written about, online you can sort of reimagine yourself, you can recreate yourself, you can be somebody else, you can be anybody you want to be. So there are a lot of young people who find a lot of value in that and a lot of help in that. I'm going to take a moment here just to say, because we talked a lot about, and there's more in the study about it, but even as we are at this time where the digital is really taking over, and we're asking kids. There used to be a time when we were trying to get kids off their phones, but now we're at a time where we're really asking young people to sort of engage with the digital world a lot, all the time, in fact. But it's really important for us, I think, to understand that it's yet another space that young people have to learn to traverse, and that the online world can be both liberating, but it can also continue the same bullying, the same patterns, the same sort of ostracizing that happens in the real world. And I think as we encourage kids and young people to enter the digital space, I think it's incumbent on us also to kind of shepherd them through it, to kind of help them to have healthy relationships with the space. A lot of different people spoke about how they view someone who's popular, in social media, And it was funny because we saw kids from the higher income groups being rather dismissive about someone who had a lot of likes on social media, and they were a bit dismissive about it and said, it doesn't mean anything. It's quite likely that she doesn't have any real connections in the real world. Whereas kids, from the less privileged backgrounds were like, wow, that's so great. See how popular she is. I want to be like that. And while there can be some of this, I want to be like that, which, can be a nice thing, it also does kind of heighten difference. And, social media just becomes another place for sort of competitiveness and sort of performance, and for young people who are experiencing loneliness, isolation, being bullied. I just think that these are red flags for all of us as we sort of help them navigate those spaces. And here's, I'm getting to almost the sort of last parts of what I think were the interesting, learnings. And that is 90%, yeah, of young people said that they had a very close bond with family members. So 90% are saying very close bond with family members. 78% of those said it was mostly with parents. Of that lot, I think more than, maybe close to 60% said it was mothers. So that felt like, oh, okay, that's like a nice protective environment. Here's everybody with close relationships to their families and their parents. But then when we sort of delved into it to understand what that meant, we discovered that only 7% of that lot said that they would actually talk about any sensitive issues, any issues around feelings, around loneliness, anything serious that had to do with their emotions and their feelings, they would not share with family, they would not share with their parents. They mostly wanted to talk to their parents about career and education and advice like that. I actually found that a very significant finding, because even when because you might ask someone like, are you close to your parents? And they may say, yes, I'm very close to my parents. But it shouldn't lead us to think that that is necessarily helping them to have meaningful emotional conversations or meaningful emotional connections about problems. So obviously, I think 48%, almost 50%, said that they would, about feelings, about emotions, about things that were difficult, they would talk to their peers. And I think that, we all know that. We've all been adolescents. We know that there's a time in your life when parents kind of are not the most important person. Your peers are. So I think it gives us an opportunity to think about, if we're going to fashion support systems, if we're going to think about support systems for the young people that we work with, the young people in our lives, then we need to have a sort of good mix of, finding safe, helping them, facilitating safe peer networks, whilst also, I think, very importantly, helping the adults in the lives of young people to step up a bit, because clearly young people need, they're hungry, they're actually very hungry for what the young people kept calling connection. So it's the lack of connection, and I think that it's quite incumbent on us to make that happen. Also important to say about family, that 46% of girls said they felt silenced, said the messaging from family, and this is, again, I'm saying this across class backgrounds, right? So kids from all kinds of from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds are saying that they feel silenced by their family members, and certainly silenced about emotional issues. And if they raise things like being depressed or being lonely or being sad, just the kind of messaging is, it's all in your head, just get over it. So when we asked kids we asked people like what they do to cope and what kind of support works for them. Not surprisingly, 47% said, they do something to entertain themselves. So entertainment works, it's distracting, and a lot of kids are resorting to that to distract themselves and make themselves feel better. 30% said that they would engage, they would like learn or do a challenging activity. They would make themselves learn something new, because when they challenge themselves, then it helps them get out of, it helps them to feel better. It helps them to get out of the funk. 23% said that they would like go to groups or something and try to find shared interests, like on online groups. 22% said they look for like spiritual spiritual and religious activities helps them to feel better. And only 4% said that they actually would express themselves, express the pain in order to cope. In terms of what young people say works for them, they say conversations where there's information, where they can actually get information, because information helps to dispel anxiety. Information helps to dispel, any sort of worries and anxieties that they may have. So conversations that have real information, not telling lies and not prevaricating and pretending and saying something else. Sort of establishing bonds. So like really making an effort to establish a personal connection. So even if you're a teacher, even if you're a social worker, even if you're a parent, a neighbor, an aunt, making an effort for there to be something personal between you and the child. It can even be something as banal as a joke that you share, but that establishes like a one-on-one kind of a relationship. Acknowledging feelings. So creating space for and acknowledging feelings. So when someone says, I'm lonely, the answer is not, it's in your head. The answer is to acknowledge, I'm sorry you're lonely, right? I'm sorry, that must feel awful that you're lonely. And so listening goes with that as well. I think kids resoundingly said that really helps. If they feel heard, then it helps. It helps to feel less isolated. It helps to feel less alone. Words of support, no surprise. Words of support are always good. So, I think being encouraging has more value than maybe we give credit for. And this one I thought was lovely. Planning activities, even if you can't do them, but it just gives you like hope for the future. So it's like, I guess what the thing was really, it was about hope and about saying that, there is a future in which other things will happen, and helping kids to think about that and focus on that was clearly something that worked for them. So those are our main findings, and I hope that they will help us to actually have a conversation about, therefore, what is it we can do? Because like, what's the point of doing research if we're not going to do something about it? No? So now that we know all this, I guess the thing really for us to ask ourselves is, what are we going to do? And I'm sure all of you are doing things already. All of us are doing things. But I don't know, how do we want to do this? Can we take some questions?
Yes,
Yeah?
I think we could take some questions. I think there has been a few questions on, I think, here you go. Would love to know more on data analysis. What was the procedure for that? Were conversations recorded and coded into themes or findings, or was there a survey to capture data from the 255 respondents as well? So I think I would like you to speak a little bit on participatory research, right? That's something that we got a question earlier as well. On like, what is participatory research? How can some of our organizations as well do it for their small groups, big groups? How does this work, like very practically?
So, just in terms of like specific methodology for for this, can I ask the person to just look at the study, because I think it's all written there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
is that
I think
fine?
that's good. Like, I think because we have only
And
20,
this is not
less
just
than
me
20
trying to
minutes.
get you to read the study, but it's very,
No, yeah, we have only about 18 minutes. So that makes sense. I think a lot of the participatory research, the methodology is in the research paper itself. So I will share that with you all post the meeting. So yeah, you will get a lot
but
of
I
that.
guess, yeah, I think just in terms of, like I said up top, I think one has to just decide why one is doing a participatory research. Like, I mean, I think we know that it's about like co-creating knowledge, co-creating data, sort of just co-understanding even what the problem is. Like, I think that you need to be very certain about why you're doing participatory research, because it's not like everything lends itself to participatory research, right? Like, our young people pointed out to us that there were some questions that they were not going to feel comfortable talking about, and they were like, no, no, that's something you do. When we brought up issues of like serious, like self-harming and suicide and stuff like that, and they were like, this is not, we're not feeling comfortable with this because we don't know what to do in a situation where we start that conversation. So I think very important to take guidance also from the people that you're working with, like the young people you're working with, um, and to ask yourself why you want to do it. Obviously we all know, when we're talking about adolescents, particularly, the UNCRC, which is something that we hold dear, talks about the right of children to participation. So that's one, like, in the context of children and adolescents, I would say that's one very, very key reason, because it is a fundamental right of children. It is a
Yeah,
foundational right of children to participate in anything, any decision that is being made about them. And so one is guessing, if you're doing research, it's towards some policy, or it's towards some recommendation that you're going to make. So adolescents have the ability to voice their opinion, and we have to recognize that evolving capacity of children,
yeah,
to be able to speak for themselves. And so when that guides you, I guess, I mean, to me, that's really sort of fundamental to it. It's like, when you know that you have to do it because, like, it's important, it's necessary. If you work with children, it's like, what's the point? We can't say that, oh, I remember what it was like and all. No, 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 you don't remember what it was like. You have to hear it, in the voice of
yeah.
in the
And
voice of
times are so different, right?
and times are so different, so even in the framing of the question, times are so different. Like, traversing, like, this world, this digital world, like, actually knowing what are the questions. Like, there were
Yeah,
questions that we wouldn't have thought to ask, but like, young people know what they are, they know what the issue is. So it's really about thrashing out, like, what's the issue and why do we want to do it. I think we had to talk a lot about, well, why do we want to know? And
yeah,
when the why we want to know is because we should do something about it, I think that was exciting for everybody, for all of the participants, because they also felt like, yeah, well, if we want to do something about it, then what do we need to know? So it was that. So it's like participation and like action, I think, saying
yeah.
it's not just a theoretical exercise, but it actually is going to lead to something that might be important and powerful and might change something for me. I think, yeah, that's what I would sort of
That's
highlight.
nice. I think this is important. One is Havovi Vadia has said the findings resonate so strongly. We surveyed 581 adolescents in Mumbai, Pune, and Delhi, and we asked what they're hearing all around them, and all the words were negative. And 67% said they felt more anxious over the past year than earlier. So
Yeah.
yes, reassure, give information, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Havovi, if you have this research and if you would like me to share it with the rest of the group that is here today, I think we all want to hear and read more about this and understand how we can help. So that'll be great. Do
Yeah.
feel free to
And
share
I'll
that.
add to what Havovi's saying, because, like, even our thing was from last year, and I think so was that one. But
Yeah,
Havovi will back me up when I say that now it's like, because in this second wave, because there's actually, like, it's also become different, right? Like,
yeah,
people are confronting death and sickness, serious sickness,
yeah,
everybody's life. And so the anxieties and all are very, very different. It's like, it's quite It's quite
Yeah.
thick with sort of emotion, the sort of anxiety kids are feeling.
Okay. Uma has a question. She says, was digi-bullying seen consistently across all classes? And how were the students dealing with it? I think that's very important to know.
Yeah, it's an important question, but I'll say this, and it's an important question, and I don't want to not give it importance. You know, a lot of our kids, a lot of the young people that were in the survey actually don't have a lot of access to digital stuff. So, digi-bullying of another kind, which is like I don't have access only to
Huh.
the digi world, right? But yes, and not just from this, but I think from all studies, I think that the digi-bullying is an issue. And I don't know if this is a factor of like who has access or not, but obviously we saw it more in it was talked about more in the higher income groups. But I'm not going to say that that's some kind of a finding about who's experiencing it more. I think that had entirely to do with who has more access. So there's that caveat. But I think it's a very serious issue, regardless of
Yeah.
who's experiencing it, because more and more kids are out there, and it's clearly a very serious issue.
Yeah. And I think just going one step further, like I think a lot of the organizations were here as well. And we just know that a lot of organizations are doing a lot of classes online and stuff. Do you like how do you think we can work towards like obviously the teacher pays attention and make sure that nobody is bullying, but these things happen, right? So how
Yeah.
do you think we could be more conscious? What could we do better?
I don't know, and I hate to put, like, I hate to burden. I mean, I know teachers are burdened already, and I know teachers like switching to the online space and digital and all of that. That must have been awfully hard.
Yeah.
But right now, you're pretty much the only connection many kids have to an outside world. So not to guilt you or not to burden you, but you really are. And so, like, and while I know that it's important for kids to get an education, and I'm not trying to say that, but for kids who have, especially for kids who only kind of can access during school hours, their parents will give them the phone or whatever it is like, what are ways for us to have other other social experiences? Is there a way for the classroom to also be a social experience outside of just academics? Because that's what kids are saying desperately they don't have. They don't have social experiences. They're not engaging with anybody. For many kids, the only time they have access to a phone or computer or whatever it is ostensibly during school hours. So I don't know, are there ways that we can do that? Are there ways that we can facilitate study groups, or facilitate, under the guise of study groups, or extracurricular activities, have facilitated peer support kind of conversations and networks? I don't know what the um,
I think there are
what the
also
resources are.
organizations that are working specifically towards this. I mean, one of the organizations I know is Responsible Netism.
Yeah.
They sort of work towards like getting. I mean, the idea is that children are using internet, and are they using it safely? How can we as adults work towards making sure it's safe for the children? And how can we tell children that things are happening on the internet? Just like reach out, we're here. And because a lot of bullying also happens on Instagram and stuff, and not necessarily
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah,
your
yeah.
in your classes. So how do we tell our children to be like awake and know what's happening, and like not fall prey to a lot of crap that comes their way? So yeah, there are organizations, and even
No,
Atma
and
is happy
I
to
mean,
help
I
you
do
with some
think
of these
that
orgs.
if we're going to be doing this, if we're going to be teaching, online for a while to come, then I would imagine it becomes really important for that to be a part of education.
Yes.
For why safety should be a part of education, no? And
Yeah.
so, like, if that's the only input children are getting, then that's the only, if you're the only input children are getting, then how can we broaden ourselves to say, well, these are also important things? And so that's, again, I was saying, it's difficult to burden teachers who have, other sort of learning outcome kind of targets that they have to meet. But maybe what we need to do is we need to come together and say, well, what does education like? What should education look like? Like, shouldn't children also have, don't they have a right to have information about basic safety, basic security? And then why isn't that a part of our, of what we're doing, what we're asked to
Curriculum.
do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I think Benita has a question. She says, here some respondents have shared that they deal and distract themselves through entertainment, spiritual ways, etc. But there is an observed need to reach out to those children who do not want to share their pain. How or what are the possible ways to intervene and help them in an institutional manner?
Um, Especially, I guess what you mean is especially right now during lockdown, right? I mean, I'm going to ask.
Benita, do you want to unmute yourself and clarify?
Yeah, generally uh, during these times and also otherwise, especially more so during these times.
Yeah, because otherwise, I think one would, I think really what the lockdown has shown, and like, I think for everybody, is like how do we build back better, right? Like, how do we make things different? So how do we create space actually for young people? So if the institution in a young person's life is school, then what can schools do? What can and then, beyond schools, then what can communities do, like mohalla committees, RWAs, parent groups? What can we do? Because I think what we're seeing across the board is people saying, like, how do we come together? So I guess that's what I was wondering, is it possible for, like, I don't know, schools or whoever it is who's actually engaged in a formal relationship every day with children, right? And right now I think it's only people who it's only schools, right?
Academic,
Through
yeah.
sort of digital learning environments. So is it possible for us to say that some part of that time, whatever, I don't know how many hours children are online, I guess it depends on, but some part of that is social. Because, going to school was not just sitting in the classroom, it was also social. It's where you met your peers. It's where, you engaged, you
Yeah.
were exposed to the world. And like now, suddenly all of that is gone, right? So are there ways for that to be incorporated into school, into digital school time? I don't know. It's a question that I
Yeah, I
would
think
ask.
also a lot of teachers are only like, even the academics, right? Like teachers are only seeing the students in the classroom. There's like 1 hour or a few hours of behavior. Like in your school, the teachers would see them roaming around doing
Yeah,
stuff. And you
yeah,
also notice then that, oh, the child is aloof and oh, this is happening.
yeah.
But you don't see that so much anymore. And yeah, I
And
think
also kids are turning off their cameras and saying, oh, network is bad and whatever, and
exactly.
their pajamas, whatever it is. But I guess I think it is something it's incumbent on us, because I
Yeah.
think, you know, through all the posturing and all of that kids might be doing, is also this very naked kind of need. And like this, clearly, like kids are in pain, right?
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, other than saying at this point, like maybe in the school day we make time. In the school day we make time for it to be something social. We make time for, teachers to be able to have that engagement and not be under the pressure of, like, I have to, you know
Just
just
finish
do
the
this, finish this
syllabus. Yeah.
geography syllabus or whatever it is, because that's enormous pressure on both the teacher um,
Yeah.
and the kid. But I don't know. I think we have to lobby for it, because I don't think it's going to occur to anybody, unless we say it. But we have to be ready to do it, and it's asking a lot of us. But I guess it's what you would do as a teacher, if the kid
We're
was
all
in
here for
front
that.
of you
Yeah.
in school. And now we just have to improvise and figure out ways to do this. And I think then when we go back to school, I think really, making sure that like the bullying and all of that, right? Like making sure that there's anti-bullying like campaigns like this, that it's not okay. Like right now, bullying is it's cool to be a bully, right? And I guess it's always been cool to be a bully. I don't know. But like making that uncool suddenly, like how do you do that? Um,
I
yeah.
think this is great. Like, I think obviously there is no, we've not in this webinar discussed very specific solutions. The research paper itself does have suggestions. So I will be sharing that with you also. Like, please do read through it. It does have some common suggestions on what can be done. I guess the main, point of this particular session was to just discuss and get it out there in the open, right? That this is happening. I hear, like, I see in the comments also a lot of people are agreeing with the fact that children are frustrated at the moment and they don't necessarily need the regular academics that we do. I mean, that's definitely part of what we need to do, but like also what's more important is to talk about their mental health at this point.
Yeah.
What happened last year, I think Havovi's organization, I mean, they did something last year, Aangan did something last year, but like we all know that what's happened this year is probably, sort of making it worse for children. So how do we, like, I mean, the point is to start a conversation. I'm happy for any of y'all, if y'all have any questions, y'all can send it to me on the network email ID, which is available to y'all. And of course, Atiya's email ID is also available in the feedback form. I'm just going to share that on the chat right now. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us if we can. I think even me as a person who can probably bring in collaborations, if I see a lot of you guys asking similar questions, I'd be happy to sort of get into another collaborative call where we could discuss how, as organizations who work in different spaces with children, how can we help. So yeah, please fill in the chat. In the chat box, I have put in the feedback form. So please fill that in. That also has a space for you all to ask more questions, whatever we're missing right now. And, this is a conversation. This is not just a webinar that is over. I think let's keep it on. Thank you so much, Atiya, for giving us
Thanks
your
very
time
much.
and sharing so much about the wonderful work that you all are doing. Thank
It's
you so
probably the
much.
first of many now we should be having about
Yes,
this
this
because
is the first of many.
yeah.
I do see in the chat box that a lot of people seem interested. So yeah, please reach out to me and let's see how we can connect. If y'all can give me suggestions of how y'all can do something, and then I could connect other organizations, and we could create a space where.
And thinking about how maybe we can mobilize families to actually step up and do a different kind of a job. I don't know,
Yes,
like maybe
so
that's
important.
something that one can do as well. So
Yeah, I mean, as organizations, even if we could get our parents together and have a discussion
yeah,
with them, similar discussion with them, right? That,
yeah.
hey,
Like a
this is what
parent
we found out.
thing, but
Yeah.
not about academics, but about this stuff. Like I don't know. There's things we could do if we put our minds to it, I think.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Please fill in the feedback form so we can take the conversation ahead from here. Thank you, Atiya.
All right.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks.